I want to go ahead and just give you a warning that during today's message, I'm going to be talking about some things that may be difficult to hear because of your experiences, because of your circumstances, or maybe just because we are not used to talking about these things in church. And so if something kind of like strikes you and you need some help, or you feel like you need some resources, I just want to let you know that Donnie and the Bridge staff are incredible at getting people connected with resources that they need this morning. 2021 has been for me and my family all about relearning how to live, relearning how to walk. On the 15th of April, my wife and I were with our small group at church at Aldersgate Methodist Church there in Abilene, Texas. And for most of my life, I have lived with mental illness. But on the 15th of April, it got almost as bad as it had ever been. And as we were sitting with our small group, I just began to kind of articulate to them like how bad my depression had gotten, but I didn't perceive it as depression. I didn't really know what it was. I just kind of thought that I had finally seen reality for what it was, and I began to say to them things like, I'm never going to be happy. And things to them like, I will never be satisfied with anything in life. I'm done judging myself for it. It just is the way that it's going to be. And all I could see was another 40 or 50 years of being disappointed with the world that I was living in. Thankfully, one of the members of our group was in therapy at the time, still is. And another one of them was a counselor, and they began to reflect back to me like, this is not healthy. The words that you're saying, the way that you're feeling is not normal in the amount that you're feeling it or articulating it to us, and we really think that you need to get some help. And so the next day I called in sick for work, and I went to my doctor, and my doctor looked at me and said, I think that we are beyond the scope of going to a counselor or going to a therapist. I think we're beyond the scope of just the medications that you're currently on. I think that you need to go to inpatient care. And as a 38-year-old who kind of just learned how to like live with it, I was confronted with an invitation that I wasn't really comfortable answering. But she wrote out, I think you need to be in inpatient care for the next 2 to 6 weeks. We know a facility in the Metroplex that you can go to. And the next day, Erin, my wife, drove me to Carrollton Springs mental health facility in Carrollton, Texas, where I spent the next 13 days in inpatient care. Now, I've been thinking a lot about how to share my story and how to like process it in this setting. Because in the church we have a really difficult time, I think, talking about mental health and mental illness in medical terms. And I also think that sometimes we kind of like compartmentalize our life and we say, well, like this is medicine, this is healthcare, and then this is like spiritual stuff. And whenever it comes to the way that we feel or the way that we act or depression and things like that, we kind of categorize it as only spiritual, or like, I saw a sign yesterday that said like falling down is not your fault, but deciding to stay down is. And I was like, well, but what if your back is broken and like nobody is like coming to help you? Like, does that really mean that it's your fault that you stay down, or could it be maybe a little more complex than that aphorism? And so I've been thinking a lot about how to share and how to talk about this, because when I was in inpatient care, by the way, I was hospitalized 4 times between April the 17th and June the 28th. 2 different hospitals. bunches and bunches of doctors, new diagnoses that went from everything from possibly bipolar, ADHD, we don't know really what's going on with you, maybe it's some past trauma, maybe it's more complicated than you think, and I'm like, complicated is a good word for how I'm feeling, but I was hospitalized for four times, and they finally came out with the diagnosis, which is major depressive disorder, and then they added a little tagline that was like a real joy to hear, that was, and they said that it's treatment resistant. But in those first 13 days that I was in inpatient care and trying to figure everything out, I kind of come to the place where I felt like the only life for me was this life. Like that my kids are going to grow up with a dad who's crazy. That's what I said to myself. That my kids are going to grow up and like once every couple of years I'm probably going to have to like go to the hospital and like stay in the hospital and they're going to like abandon me. Like all of these narratives in my head that led down some really dark roads began to just kind of like become concrete, in my brain. But the first meal that I had at Carrollton Springs, I just kind of made the decision that I was going to sit by myself. Because even though I'm insane, I'm not as insane as the people that are like running around and screaming. Right? Like we kind of have that in our head, like, yeah, I'm bad, but at least I'm not that bad, right? Even though I still had shoes with no laces, I still had pants with no drawstrings, I wasn't able to bring a pen or a pencil into my room. I mean, I had the same structured environment, no door on my room, and a bathroom that didn't have a full door on it. I mean, I still had the same structured environment as everybody else in the place, but I said I'm going to sit by myself because as bad as I am, at least I'm not as bad as fur coat and fedora guy, right? So I go through the line and I get my food and we have for utensils, plastic utensils, right? So I got my fork, I got my spoon, and I went and I sat down by myself, and Fedora and Fur Coat guy is like, hey, dude, you want to come sit with us? I'm good, thank you, right? Put my hoodie on so everyone knows to leave me alone, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my meal, and it's meat with gravy. That's all I know. There are some potatoes and things like that, but it's meat with gravy. And so I get my fork and I'm sitting by myself and I'm trying to like stab the meat to get it to break off. Like, I don't know like what the way to eat the meat with gravy is. Do you just put the fork in the middle and then pick it up and then just like eat it, like a 6-year-old, or like how do you do this? And so I'm struggling to cut the meat. Like the fork is plastic, so every time I try to cut the meat, a tine breaks off, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. Do they just give us food so we'll starve? Like I don't know what to do because we couldn't have knives. No knives in the building. And so I'm sitting there and I'm trying to eat my food and I'm isolated and I'm alone and I'm frustrated. And then Fedora and Fur Hat guy leans over and says, dude, turn it around. And I'm like, what? So I turn my plate in, like, no, turn your fork around. It works great as a knife. You see, Fur Coat and Fedora guy had been hospitalized before. Had known that whenever he got to the meal, he wouldn't have a knife, and had figured out a way to turn it around and to make it work. So I turned my fork around and I held on to like the tine side, and I just began to use the handle of my fork to cut the meat. And then I turned it around again and I used it. to sustain my life. And in this passage, as I was studying it and I was reading it, all I could think about was the alchemy of grace, that Jesus invites us to utilize the things in our lives that aren't working for us anymore. And he's saying, turn it around and let me show you how to use it in a new way. You see, the writer of Isaiah 61 never says that it's not okay to mourn. He never says that it's wrong to suffer. He doesn't say that there is never a time in life for sadness and for grief. In fact, he talks specifically to those who have opened themselves up and have been responsive to their pain and their suffering, because the writer knows what God knows, that when we open ourselves up to the possibility of something new, that new realities begin to exist for us and in us. And God is saying, turn it around. Is your story marked by grief and you've just held it to yourself? God is saying, turn it around, put it in my hands, and use it in a new way. Is your story marked by shame and isolation and loneliness? And God is coming to us and saying to us, turn it around. Let's look at it from a new perspective, and possibly it could be used to make things work for you. You see, the writer in Isaiah 61 and Jesus later on in Luke chapter 4 is not saying that when you come to me and you trade it in, that it's necessarily that God is just going to take it and make it disappear. But what God is going to do is God is going to take it and give it back to you in a new way so that it will benefit other people in this world. Because the writer goes on in verse 4 to say, and they will be called. Who will be called? Those who mourn, those who suffer, those who have experienced grief. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord, and they will rebuild and restore and renew what's been lost and devastated and broken. I believe that when we open ourselves up to the difficult realities of this life, whether your story, like mine, is one of mental health and mental illness, or maybe it's something completely different, then when we open ourselves up to the difficult realities of life and we allow God to transform them and change them, that we become the ones who rebuild and restore and renew what's been lost and devastated and broken. Fur coat and fedora guy was in touch with his pain, and he used what he had learned through his pain to teach me how to cut my meat in gravy, right? But he taught me so much more. And all throughout the last 4 or 5 months, however long it's been, God has placed people in my life who are rebuilders and restorers and renewers. People who themselves knew pain, who themselves had felt stuck, but had allowed God to take their story and turn it around for something new. Church, this is who we are. We're not perfect people. We're people who know a God that turns walls into bridges and graves into gardens and dry bones into armies and water into wine and goats into sheep. Turn it around. Do we have time just for like one more story? So during my first hospitalization, every day I had to pass by a vending machine. And I'd never been in a psychiatric facility before, so I didn't know that I needed like money, like dollar bills, y'all. I didn't know. And so every day I had to pass by this vending machine, and in the vending machine was my favorite candy, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Can I get an amen? And I would just like pass by and just like look at it like, if only I could steal some money from one. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't think that. I did think that. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. And so I called Aaron and I was like, babe, I don't have any money, but there's some like Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and I really want to eat them, but I don't have any money. Like, can you figure out a way to give me some money? And she's like, okay, maybe 13 days without Reese's Peanut Butter Cups is not a bad deal, you know? But she had compassion and empathy. And I also needed some books to read because I didn't know that I could take books. I didn't know anything, right? I was learning this all from just as I was going. And so we have a friend named Carly. She's a pastor in the Metroplex. And I was like, Carly probably has some really good books that I can read. And so Aaron reached out to her and was like, hey, will you send Tim some books? Because she was close by and she could bring them to us. And apparently Aaron said, and if you have any money, like some dollar bills, like throw those in there as well, because he wants some Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, right? And so Carly brings these books. I look at all the books. I'm really excited about it. And at the bottom of the bag, there's $16. And she told Aaron on the phone, it's just all I had. There's nothing significant about the $16. It's just what I had on me that I could bring. And so she put it in the bag, and I was like, yes. So I go to the vending machine, I put $2 in, I push F4 and the little turning thingy starts to turn, and those Reese's Peanut Butter Cups start to come out, and then they get stuck. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't get stuck. They fell down. I reached my hand in there. I took them back and ran them to my room, and I sat on my bed. And I'm not kidding you when I say that I sat on my bed and I opened up those Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and I began to like consume them. And for the first time in a long time, I said a prayer. I said, God, thank you for friends like Carly. And can I tell you that eating those Reese's Peanut Butter Cups like felt like communion to me? Like it felt like an embodied expression of the love and the compassion of Jesus, given to me through an imperfect human being. And that's my prayer for us as a church. That we would see people who are lonely, and we would see people who are broken, and we would see people who have needs, and we wouldn't judge them, but we would meet the needs that we could meet. And in so doing, that they would experience, in small ways and in big ways, the God who is present with us and is turning all things around. Amen.